Is Justine Price O'Neill, and I'm one of the Writing and Study Skills tutors with Wake Text TLC. And this video is about comparison and contrast essay writing. So we will be talking about some tips to help you improve in this area and help you figure out how to effectively write a comparison and contrast essay. So whether you are currently working on this type of essay or you plan to be in the future, I hope that you find this information helpful. Comparison and contrast essays are often assigned to college writing students because they really help enhance your critical thinking and your analysis skills and synthesis, which are important keys to academic writing. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with our content for today. Here is our agenda. So we will first talk about some brainstorming, an important step before you even begin writing the essay itself. And then we will talk about the thesis statement, a very important part of the essay, of any essay. And then we'll talk about organization, also important to any type of writing, but especially there are certain organizational patterns that you want to follow for compare contrast writing. Then we'll talk about development and flow and end with some final tips to help you be successful with writing a compare and contrast essay. So again, compare and contrast essays, they're essays that ask you to evaluate either the similarities and or the differences between two or more subjects. So that can be kind of complicated. There's a lot going on in this type of writing, but that's what we're going to talk about today to hopefully make this process a little bit easier for you. So let's look at an example sample assignment. So this is from one English course at Wake Tech. You can see here the assignment prompt asks the student, it says, you will write a comparison contrast essay. For this assignment, you must choose two scholarly articles to compare and contrast and present your analysis in the structure of an academic essay. These articles must be focused on the problem you have chosen for the semester. Your analysis should be specific, meaningful, and illuminative. Use textual evidence to support your claims and interpret the quotes sufficiently. Additionally, your exploration of the similarities and/or differences should lead you to some specific claim that expands beyond the simple statement that these two essays are alike in some ways but different in others. How are they different? Why? What influences led to that outcome? Okay, so you might be working on something similar to this, and whenever you are assigned an essay, the assignment sheet is very important. You want to study it carefully before you begin the paper, and then while you're working on the paper, and then consult the sheet again before you submit the final draft. Now, when you first see the assignment sheet, it's a good idea to take some notes on it and clearly identify the most important parts to help get you started. So if you were looking at this assignment sheet, maybe think, what are the most important parts that you would really need to take note of so that you could be successful in getting started on this assignment? So it might look something like this. We see our purpose here, the type of essay is a comparison contrast essay. We see that our two subjects that we're going to be comparing are two scholarly articles. So that's important. And we can see that these articles also must be focused on the problem that we've chosen for this semester. So that would have been something we would have done previously. We also see that we need textual evidence. So quotes right from our sources would be needed for the support. And then it says we can be looking at similarities and or differences, and that we need a specific claim. And questions we might consider with that claim is, how are they different, why, and even that what influences led to that outcome. So this is an example of how you might go about finding the important details within a sample prompt. You can see that point about the specific claim, that's going to be your thesis statement. So whenever you see that it's asking you a question like, how are they different, why, that is going to help you compose your thesis statement, because your thesis statement is your claim. So when you answer the question of the prompt, now you can put that in a statement. That's going to be your thesis statement. If you don't see a question, you can look at what it's asking you to do and turn it into the question. For example, if the prompt asked you or stated, write a comparison contrast essay on how these two articles are different, you could turn that into a question just like they have here and say, how are these two articles different? Okay, so you can see there's some work that you need to do right away just by looking at the assignment sheet. And those are very important steps. Next, we can move to narrowing the topic. So early in the process, you also want to be working on narrowing your topic idea so that it's not too broad and it's not too narrow, but it fits the scope of the assignment. So here are some questions you might ask yourself. First, do I have to compare and contrast or just one? Now, if we look back at that previous assignment sheet, we see similarities and or differences. So we know for this one, we could do comparing how they're similar, contrasting how they're different, or we could do both. But some assignments might ask you to do just one or the other. Also, have I found unique, interesting elements? So here it's important to not just state obvious similarities or differences, but trying to find deeper messages. And also, like on the assignment sheet here, it says expand beyond the simple statement that they're alike in some ways but different in others. Okay, so once you have narrowed your purpose, comparing, contrasting, or just one, and also your specific topic idea, unique, interesting elements, that's going to be setting you up to write your essay. But if you're not there yet, or in order to get there, you might need to engage in some brainstorming. So especially once you have analyzed your assignment sheet and maybe thought some about narrowing your topic, you want to do some brainstorming to prepare you to actually start writing the essay. So there are a couple of good ways to go about that specifically for this type of writing with the comparison and contrast. Okay, so you can see here charting. Now, charting is helpful because it lets you see the comparisons between your two subjects visually in an organized way. So you can see here, you would have, a large space where you can jot down all the ways that your two subjects, if it was about the two articles from previously, the previous assignment sheet, all the way those articles are similar. Just list that here. Here, you could talk about just the one subject, and then in this column, the other subject. So it helps you see how are they different and how are they similar. And you don't want to be too judgmental about your ideas here. Just write anything that comes to mind. This isn't necessarily what your paper is going to be about, but it just helps you get your ideas flowing. So just writing things down, thinking, analyzing is an important first step. So charting is one way, but there's another good way for comparison and contrast writing too, and that's called the Venn diagram. So you might have heard this before in even different areas, but especially for essay writing in comparing and contrasting, it's really nice because you just draw these circles, and then you have over here in this part of the circle all about item one, what is specific to item one. And then over in this circle, all about item two, what is specific to item two. And then in this overlapping section, what do they have in common? Okay, so this also helps you visually compare your subjects. And whichever you choose, if you like to chart, if you like the Venn diagram, if you just like free writing in your own way that makes sense, color coding, in any type of brainstorming that you want to do in that kind of pre-writing process. But the goal is to brainstorm all the similarities and differences between your two subjects that you can think of, and then settle on probably about three. Because once you have those three key similarities or differences, you will be ready to write your thesis statement. Okay, the thesis statement. So like any paper, the thesis is the most important sentence. It appears at the very end of your introduction paragraph, but it's a good idea to write it first because then you have a roadmap for the whole essay to help keep you focused. And specifically for a compare contrast essay, the thesis is a clear, concise argument that outlines the comparison or the contrast that you will be making. So there are some different types of thesis statements specifically for compare and contrast essays. You want to make sure that the thesis contains your two subjects and your 3 points of comparison. So to set it up, ask yourself, first, am I focusing on similarities or differences or both? Now, if you're emphasizing the similarities, you might have a thesis that looks something like this. Although subject A and subject B appear different, they share critical similarities in 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so you can see you plug in your two subjects that you are comparing, and then you are listing those three similarities. That would be a thesis that's emphasizing the similarities. Now, another option, if you are emphasizing differences, you might say, while subject A and subject B have similarities, or have some similarities, their key differences lie in 1, 2, and 3. So same thing, you put in your two subjects and your three key points, but here you are going to be focusing on how they're different. Or maybe you're going to take a balanced approach, which you might say subject A and subject B differ significantly in X, but share similarities in Y. Or if you had 3 points, you might say differs significantly in X, but share similarities in Y and Z. So you can order it however you want, but you see you need to get in your two subjects and then your key points that you will be exploring in the body paragraphs. So let's look at a real life example. So here's a sample thesis statement. You see here, although clinical depression and general anxiety disorder seem to be similar, they are actually quite different when examining their general causes, common symptoms, and medical treatment. So here we can see we have two subjects, clinical depression and general anxiety disorder. There is a note that they seem similar, but this paper is going to emphasize the differences in those three areas: general causes, common symptoms, medical treatment. Okay, so this thesis is setting up a focus on those differences between the two subjects, and we can clearly see the plan of development the essay will follow in the body paragraphs. So it's important that the way you lay out your three key points in the thesis is the same order that you will follow within the body paragraphs. All right, now, once you have your key points and your thesis statement, you're ready to start thinking about the paper's structure and outline. The organization of a compare-contrast essay is very important because you are working with two different subjects and probably three different key points. So it's really important to stay organized so the reader is able to easily follow the flow of your paragraphs. Now, one way to structure your essay is with the point-by-point method. You can see the outline for a point-by-point paper right here. In this format, the point, or each of the three key points, become the focus of each body paragraph. And you include ideas from both essays or both subjects, whatever you're comparing, in each paragraph. Therefore, a topic sentence in this format would clearly enunciate the point of comparison or contrast that you want to make. So you have your introduction paragraph where you would introduce the two subjects being compared, ending with a thesis statement. And then key point number 1 is the focus of body paragraph number 1. You have a topic sentence, you talk about subject 1, you compare subject 2, and then a closing sentence. And then the next body paragraph goes to the next point, and so on, ending with your conclusion. So point by point is a very common way to analyze or develop your compare-contrast essay. But there's another option too, and it is called the block method. Now, you might choose the block method to organize your ideas where the focus of the paragraphs are in block by block organization, they focus on each individual element. So this format discusses the two elements separately before showing the connection between them. So again, you start with your introduction, where you introduce your two subjects and with a thesis, but then the first part of the body of the essay will focus only on subject 1. So maybe the first essay or whatever it is that you are comparing, and you would give all 3 points about that particular subject. Then you switch to subject 2 and use the same 3 points of comparison, but talk about how they work in subject 2. And then you end with your concluding ideas. Okay, so there's not necessarily one right way to do this. Either can work, but you want to think about what makes sense for your paper and what flows most easily for you. But once you do pick an organizational method, it's a good idea to write out your ideas in an outline format just like this, either in the block or in the point by point like that. So that will make writing your paper a whole lot easier. Now, once you do have your outline ready, you can then move to developing your body paragraphs. So there are some considerations you want to keep in mind when writing the body of the essay. First, topic sentences. So the topic sentence is the first sentence of a body paragraph. And in that topic sentence, it's important that you provide a clear indication of the point that is being compared or contrasted within that paragraph. And again, you have probably already previewed this in your thesis statement, so that topic sentence should refer back to your thesis statement. All right, another thing to consider is transitions. So transitions are really important in a compare contrast essay. You know, you're moving from sometimes talking about how things are similar, sometimes talking about how they're different to help your reader follow what you're on. Use those transition words or phrases to help them flow through your writing. So if you are focusing on how something is similar, you can use transitions like these: similarly, likewise, in the same way, both, also, and, in addition, in the same manner. All of those show the reader that you are moving to a new point that is similar. Or if you're moving to a new point that is different, transition words for differences include on the other hand, however, in contrast, whereas, while, still, yet, nevertheless, rather, on the contrary, although, but. So any of those could work to move to an idea that is showing difference. Okay, also you want to be thinking about supporting evidence. So once you have your topic sentence, when you have stated your point, you need to move into showing how that similarity or difference exists. So you do that by providing examples, maybe quotations, research if that's required, to support those ideas. Okay. Now, let's talk about introductions and conclusions. So also very important parts of the essay. And you can see, even though we are talking about the introduction, your first or your first paragraph of your essay, we're doing this later in our presentation because you don't necessarily have to write it first. Like I mentioned earlier, writing the thesis statement first is helpful to show where you're going. Outlining your key points is helpful. And when you're ready to write the introduction and conclusion, these are the things that you want to be thinking about. One thing to think about first is just visualizing. If you look at these triangles that we have here, you can see that the introduction starts more broadly, the broad part of the triangle, and then it comes to a point. It ends with the point. So that means it starts by talking about your topic in more general, broad terms, and then ends with your specific point, which is the thesis statement. And then the conclusion is the opposite setup. It begins by restating the thesis, what's your main point, and then it opens it up more broadly and in general terms again. Okay, so those are important things to be thinking about. In your introduction, though, you want to begin by briefly introducing the subjects. You can do this in a way to get the reader's attention, like a hook. And like I said, start in a more general way. Then provide more background information or context about these subjects and end with a clear thesis statement, like we talked about earlier. And in the conclusion, as I mentioned, you restate the thesis first in a new way. So you're not copying and pasting it, but reminding the reader of what is your main point and what were your key ideas to support that. So you'll be summarizing the key points and then ending in that broader general way by providing a final thought or implication of the comparison. So what's the bigger picture meaning here? Why is this important? Again, too, maybe refer back to your assignment sheet. Sometimes your instructor will tell you what they would like to see in the introduction and conclusion. But if they don't provide a lot of insight there, these are the general ways that you should construct each of those paragraphs. Okay, so before we finish, here are some more tips to make sure you're effectively creating your compare and contrast essays. First is about picking your topic. So make sure that you're picking subjects that have a meaningful connection. You want to make sure that the subjects can be fairly compared with enough points of similarity or contrast, or both. Again, referring back to your assignment sheet for help with that too. In regards to proofreading and revision, you want to be checking for clarity, coherence, and balance in comparing both subjects. And of course, paying attention to things like your grammar, your MLA or APA formatting. And to help with all of that, this last point is important, seek feedback. So remember that you can rely on either peer reviews or getting help from an instructor or friend or family member who can look at a paper for you. And of course, coming to the Writing Center is a helpful idea too. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our session. I hope you've learned some helpful tips that you can take and use in your writing assignments. And remember that you can always reach out to us at the TLC at Wake Tech. We do group workshops on topics that are helpful for people in general, but we also offer one-on-one sessions with tutors. So especially for writing, it's really helpful to bring in your papers or maybe just bring in your assignment sheet when you're not sure about how to get started and get help with that. So you can visit our website that you see right here and schedule an appointment through bookings. We offer both in-person and virtual options. If you have any questions, you can feel free to reach us at this email address right here. But again, thank you so much for viewing this video. I hope that you found it helpful. Good luck with your writing assignments, and we hope to see you in the TLC. Bye.